Victory Studios in downtown Little Rock, this is Capitol View.
And welcome to Capitol View. I'm your host, Roby Brock. Thank you for joining us. In the new Congress, Arkansas has scored 5 committee chairmanships among its 6-member congressional delegation. Joining me now is French Hill Republican of Little Rock, and he is the new chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, one of those 5 that I mentioned. Not that there's slacker on the 6th one. Congressman Womack's the chair of a subcommittee that's might be as powerful as yours.
Right.
So.
They refer to those subcommittee chairs on appropriations as cardinals.
Yeah.
And so Steve Womack has chaired more than one of the appropriations committees. He's an outstanding member and a senior appropriator. So I really count him as a 6th, there's no doubt.
Yeah, but how unprecedented is that? I mean, I've looked back at Arkansas history, and we've had some influential congressmen and senators before, but we've never had a full delegation this influential.
No, it is unprecedented to have the entire delegation in leadership in the House and Senate on a bicameral basis. I think it's a real credit to the hard work and talent of the delegation. But you're right, looking back, you see that period between 1955 and 1975 with Wilbur Mills and John McClellan and Bill Fulbright, just icons in their roles and their various committees. But this is a time where I think you'll see that our delegation is a workhorse delegation, and they're going to do a good job in these committees, in my view.
All right, let's talk about some of your priorities as House Financial Services Chairman there. What's going to be the biggest regulatory relief that you're going to push for?
Well, look, I believe strongly in tailoring regulations. So the more large and complex your business strategy, the more regulatory surveillance and scrutiny that you ought to have. The smaller and more straightforward your business, you ought to have a lighter touch regulation. You still comply with the regulations, but you have it in a less costly way to the institution. So I have an effort to do that for community banks. One way to do that, Roby, would be to raise the definition of a community banking company up beyond 10 billion to a much larger number, and I think that would really help. The same with regional banks, maybe raise that number to 100 billion or so. That derives the regulatory guidance, that drives some of the regulatory burden for the institutions. So tailoring regulations is really a top goal I have in the bank.
Is there some legislation that is already developed or under development right now to accomplish some things that you want to see done as chairman, or are you at the point where it's just we've got to have more conversations to decide what it is that we want to do? No,
we've got bills that do this. They amend the banking acts to give that flexibility to the regulators, provide that relief to smaller banks. I have a bill called the Fair Exam Act that creates an ombudsman for community banks that believe they had an exam finding that wasn't accurate, and they want to have a second opinion on working with their federal regulator. That's another thing we've heard consistently from banks across the country.
You've been active on cryptocurrency in terms of policy. The President Trump has indicated this is probably going to be a priority in his administration. What's realistic to see passed?
Right. So 2 things are different from the last Congress. In the last Congress, we did get the House Financial Services Committee voted on a dollar-backed stablecoin. This would be a tokenized payment in dollars, a digital payment that could be used in a blockchain application internationally to regulate those under U.S. law. The second thing we did was we had a bill that was the regulatory structure for crypto. How do you raise money for crypto? How are you regulated in digital assets? What's a commodity? What's a security? Both those bills passed the committee, and our regulatory framework bill passed the whole House with strong Democratic support. What's different this Congress is the administration. The Trump administration supports an innovation agenda for financial technology, including digital assets. And over in the Senate, Tim Scott, the incoming Banking Committee chair, John Bozeman from Arkansas, the incoming Agriculture Committee chair, also support that agenda. So in this Congress, we have, I think, the ability to get those 2 things done. A stablecoins bill under U.S. law that I think extends the value of the dollar around the world, and a regulatory market structure for crypto.
When you come back on this show in a couple of months, are we going to have already seen some legislation move through, or am I going to be talking to you about this come November of when we might start seeing some things move?
Great question. We have our first hearing next week, and we will be, in my view, doing those hearings and trying to get those bills passed through committee in the first 3 or 4 months of this year. and then we'll see what happens. We'll see how also we work together with the Trump administration once they get all their top leaders confirmed by the Senate. That'll help us. We need the talent in the Trump administration to help us do this, and also working with Tim Scott and John Bozeman. It's going to be a good partnership.
Yeah.
We're going to work hard on it.
Is the new Treasury Secretary, is that approved by you?
Scott Besant's going to do a great job as Treasury Secretary. We've talked a lot about my community banking agenda, capital formation, housing, and we've talked about digital assets. I think he's going to be a good partner for us in the House.
All right, I want to get you to comment on a couple of things this week. There was a little bit of chaos from the White House executive order on a spending freeze. I think it's been cleared up because they rescinded the executive order. Kind of what's your take on what happened and how do we avoid confusion again?
Right. I do think it was confusing. It struck me a little bit of ready, fire, aim. That the idea that the executive branch would review very carefully all spending that's forthcoming through grant programs, I think it's a good idea. I mean, the Article 1, the legislature approves money through the appropriation process, but we challenge the executive branch, Article 2, to faithfully implement those laws. They have a right to review and see if they think that the executive branch is doing a good job on that. Secondly, we've got a $2 trillion deficit. And so if they want to be more discreet in how they spend money for the taxpayers, I think that's smart too. But I think this was an example of getting out ahead of themselves. They hadn't communicated this very well. Even in one news cycle, they changed their minds a couple of times on it. So I think Article 2 scrutiny of spending appropriated by Congress is fine with me. I think they should do it, but they ought to do it in a more thoughtful way.
Changing your mind in the middle of several news cycles in one day is
Wait,
a
what?
hallmark of the Trump administration. I've told
I
people
won't comment
before,
on that.
I feel like sometimes in the first Trump administration, there were 6 news cycles in one day. It's a tiresome thing there. Let's stay on efficiency a little bit here. The Department of Governmental Efficiency is something that President Trump has set up. Elon Musk is, I think, going to oversee this. What is off the table for you as a Congress? Where do you draw a line in the sand and say we are not going to make changes to Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid? What's off the table for you?
Well, I think the idea of DOGE is a good one in a modern context. I mean, you and I are of the vintage where the J. Peter Grace Commission was asked by President Reagan to find government efficiency.
I was still young then.
I know you were a child. Yeah. But you know, that was an idea where people meet, hear ideas from the agencies, and make a recommendation and write a book. The idea of DOGE of being more interactive and using social media is helpful, I think, because if you spot something that's challenging, that triggers people in the executive branch and the legislative branch to take a look at it. So the idea that DOGE is going to have some priorities looking for governmental efficiency, here's my summary thoughts on it. One, they may find some things that the executive branch can do themselves, just through better management. They can propose a different IT system and ask Congress to fund something that's much more effective. Why don't you put some of your payments on a blockchain instead of going through the ACH system and having a lot of paperwork associated with it? That's an idea of executive efficiency, use of office space, selling buildings we don't need, getting out of leases that we don't need, streamlining government. That would be good. So that's, I think, in the domain of the executive branch. They may have structural ideas. You ought to have a better approach to some sort of a program. That's going to take Congress. So we view it as a way to have an outside resource looking in, making recommendations that Congress could consider. And this gets to your point about how Social Security is delivered or some aspect of some other social safety net program. They may have ideas, but it's going to take Congress to work on those. And then thirdly, it may spur employees in Congress, almost like a whistleblower or increase engagement of employees to come up with their own ideas. This happened in the 1920s when Calvin Coolidge was president. Employees were rewarded with bonuses if they came up with ideas to make the government more efficient. So let's see what happens.
All right. You were around for the Calvin Coolidge administration. I was not.
Lincoln was a great president.
Congressman French Hill, thank you for being with us. Appreciate you. We are back with more right after this.